I'm Alana. I use they and she pronouns,
And I'm Jessie. I use she and her pronouns.
and we're
And we're
making.
making mentions. Making Mentions is an organization providing radical Jewish education.
And this is the Artist Series where we showcase queer, Jewish, anti-Zionist artists. Today we're talking to Micah. Micah, introduce yourself. What are your pronouns? Where do you call home? Astrological sign if you're into that, and tell us what kind of art you make.
So happy to be here. I go by they, them. I live in Berkeley, California. I've been here for about, I don't know, over 22 years now. And I have been a graphic artist doing illustration, design with social justice movements for decades now. And I also do a lot of cultural organizing behind the scenes.
That's a very neat summary of all the millions of things that you do. Wow. I want to jump us right in and feel free to go wherever you want with this question. What was your relationship to Judaism like growing up? And how does Judaism show up in your life now, if at all?
So my father was born in Warsaw in 1937. So he grew up in hiding in Nazi Europe, and his immediate family survived the war. And like a lot of other Jews, a lot of people went to the US, Canada, Argentina, Australia, settler colonial countries, European Jewish folks who could become white. So he went to Australia when he was 12. And my mother's family is from Lodz in Poland and also went to Australia. And they came to the US right before I was born. So I feel like I'm the tail end of people growing up with parents who survived the Nazi Holocaust. And I think like a lot of people who came through that experience, they either embraced Judaism or said, fuck no, fuck religion. And it was definitely the second in my family. So they were incredibly culturally Jewish. I think of it as like direct from the shtetl. My mother's first language was Yiddish. I definitely grew up with all the particular Ashkenazi neurosis and knew nothing about religious Judaism, basically, and was not raised Zionist, which was great. So I think as an adult, my experience of Judaism as a trans person, as an anti-Zionist, as an anti-racist, has been completely about reconnecting with Judaism from that standpoint. And also the Jewish people in my life often are other people who are reconnecting with Judaism. And a thing that I often am expressing to people is like how this is a very Jewish experience, like back to Moses, and Jews who didn't know they were Jewish didn't know what being Jewish meant, and that we can reshape it for ourselves.
Yeah, I feel like so many of the people that we talk to in these conversations that we have that experience of coming back to Judaism and defining it for themselves or redefining it for themselves. And I know that's been my experience and Jesse's experience as well. And I continue to find it very powerful and special to be able to like have the agency to choose something that important to you and create it in a way that feels good for you and create ritual around it in a way that feels good for you. Yeah. So thank you for that. A pivot, but not really, because I'm curious about how Judaism shows up in your art. But more broadly, I'm curious about how all of the identities that you hold impact and show up in your artwork.
My last answer got you up to a certain point, and then because I wasn't raised Zionist, I first encountered Israeli apartheid and genocide as an adult who already was involved in anti-racist work. And so I couldn't have imagined what that was. And when I actually went to Palestine, like for many of us, that was absolutely revolting, heartbreaking, and also completely inspiring and life-changing in terms of connecting with Palestinians in the struggle. When I came back from Palestine many years ago, I just had no ability to stomach being in Jewish spaces that were not anti-Zionist. And that's also part of why I'm so excited to be on your show and excited that your show exists. So I think since then, my connection with Judaism has been extremely limited, and I'm really sad about that. So I think now I'm in a moment of trying to reconnect with Judaism and Jewish anti-Zionist spaces. I think for many years, I really just had focused on trying to be of service as a white person in anti-racist work, which is also incredibly meaningful and important to me. But I need both those things.
To be very honest, I have spent a lot of time internet stalking you, and I have spent a lot of time with your Tim Toon zine from 1999, which, as an aside, like incredible what you were writing and sharing and putting together as being like their Haggadot that we're putting together now. And I'm sure you know this because you know everyone's obsessed with it, but like people are pulling your words exactly into their Haggadot because they're still so relevant. They speak so deeply to all of us. And I hope you don't mind. I would like to read some of it to you because I think this goes back to what you were sharing about your childhood, your upbringing. But as a Jewish educator and as someone that works a lot with kids, I'm always wondering and questioning about assimilation and Judaism in America. So I'm going to read this out loud to you, and then I have a question, kind of long. Bear with me. The messages I got from my parents were confusing because for so long, I could not see the enemy. The experience of the Holocaust caused many of its survivors to sense danger everywhere. Yes, there was and is anti-Semitism all around us. But in the US, it is mostly subtle, not the immediate life-threatening kind. This kind will kill you too, but slowly, gently. It kills cultures, the soul of a people, through assimilation, not through actually destroying their bodies. When we have been made so afraid, so ashamed that we cannot ever raise our voices to explain our traditions to our children, then we have taken in the enemy. So I love this connection between embodied anti-Semitism of the past and then embodied anti-Semitism now and assimilation. And there's no one answer to this question, but how do you think we can begin this process of healing ourselves and fighting back against assimilation?
That's just a small question.
Softball.
I just want to name it is a trip. It is a trip to have things I wrote when I was half the age I am now read back to me. And truly, I just was talking to another artist friend who's around my age about this. That's one of our dearest hopes and dreams as an artist, is that our art will have a life in the world, that our art will inspire other artists. If I did nothing else, and I'm just always in awe of the fact that when we are creating, we just cannot know what is going to happen to what we create. I truly wrote that zine to try and just live as a young Jewish trans person. I can't explain to folks how there was nothing in 1999, more than there was 20 years before that, but it really was a different world. And never could I have imagined that it would be something people would still be reading, that people I didn't know would still be reading. I didn't know Promo. I didn't know distro. People just photocopied it. It was before the internet as it is now, and just made hundreds of copies and handed it out to their friends, to their work, to their loved ones. Yeah, it's really meaningful to me. So thank you for that gift. And it feels so Jewish, like in the way that we time travel in our tradition. I'm just thinking about how resisting Zionism as much as we can is something that we can do to give life to our culture. I was talking to somebody about the poster I made with J-Fridge after the Tree of Life massacre that has that Yiddish saying, "We will outlive them." And I don't know if I should tell the whole story, but Hannah Temple and Sibylette, the band, unearthed this song in the past several years that has brought it back into circulation for our movements when we needed it. So thank you to them. And we made this poster with their permission. In 1939, a group of Hasidic Jews from the Polish city of Lublin were backed up against barbed wire and ordered to sing to their own execution. One of the men began singing, let us reconcile," but nobody joined him. And then he improvised They überleben, überleben, überleben. We will outlive them. And instantly the song took hold among the entire people until it catapulted them into a stormy and feverish dance. The Nazi commander at first laughed at them, but then he realized they weren't accommodating him, they were defeating them. He ordered them to stop, but they continued, even when the SS troops charged at them. So I've spent some time recently thinking about this story and what the hell does it mean? What does it mean to say we will outlive them when your body is about to die? And I've been thinking about some of the mycelial scientists that are so inspiring to us in the movement now, Simard and Robin Wall Kimmerer, and how they are reiterating what so many indigenous people have always known and that parts of Jewish teaching have always known. Of course, everything is connected and how exactly it is connected. And so one of the things I learned is that when giant, giant ancestor trees are felled, when the cutting begins, they rush all of their stored nutrients out of the mycelial network to all the other trees in the grove. And that's how I understand that story. That even if our individual lives are ending, the big life, we can recommit to it in that moment. And that's what anti-Zionism is. Zionism is a death song for Palestinians and for Jews and for all of us. And recommitting to anti-Zionism is recommitting to Jewish life.
I literally had chills. I know the story because it's a story that I love, and I love that quote so much. I don't know, that's one of the ones that makes me emotional every time I hear it, but I had full body chills when you were reading it. Just you read it really beautifully, and I think it's an important reminder, and I love the connection of I'm very big on mycelium and plants, and so I love the connection to our natural world and then the connection to anti-Zionism being our version of outliving them, outliving this, like, death song that is Zionism. I think that is so powerful and wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Actually, this isn't really a pivot. I think this is pretty in line with what we're talking about, but it is from a different project of yours. So we found this quote from the Trans Day of Resilience art project. I'm just gonna read the quote, and then I have a brief question connected to it. The quote is, "Art touches us powerfully and immediately. It conveys our dreams, rage, and joy in ways that data and petitions cannot. Artists in frontline and targeted communities expand our movements and cross social divides by uncovering truths, reimagining our stories, and engaging more people. Cultural work may not always result in easily measurable outcomes, but it opens crucial space to dream bigger and envision the world we want to create." With that in mind, what do you think of the idea of art itself as resistance? And do you feel like you make art as a form of resistance?
First, I just want to acknowledge that art can be obviously used for any purpose. Art can be authoritarian, it can be fascistic, it can be oppressive, but I do know that art is part of our human birthright. For tens of thousands of years, humans have been making art and non-humans have been making art. It's part of what we are meant to do in the world. And there's a lot I can say and want to say about art and our movements and how art is impactful and helps us win. And when I'm making art, I feel so much joy. I just feel happy in my body. I feel happy in my spirit. I feel sad for people who feel like they can't allow themselves to make art because it's not productive. And I'll just say I had so many years where I didn't make art. And I grew up in a family where, because of their experiences, anything that made you stand out was very scary. And art is one of those things. And it definitely was to put it mildly, not encouraged. And I really came back to art over many years, fought my way back with the support mostly of older women of color, queer and trans women of color in the movement. I often tell the story of Miss Major Griffin Gracie, who many of us love, a Black trans elder in our movement. And if you don't know who she is, please just go look her up right now for any listeners. She saw that I liked to draw and just said, "Baby, I love what you're making there. Would you make me a postcard to send to the girls in prison?" And that was like one of the first things that I ever made. It was just like this little postcard that we made together that said, "Stay safe and be strong." And just little things like that with Patty Byrne, Miriam Kaba, so many other incredible people who just believed in me when I didn't believe in myself until finally I believed I could do it. This is why we make art in relationship. When you see any piece of my art, there are just so many people who have enabled that to come into the world. I think it's part of our birthright as humans. And in the movement specifically, I've just witnessed a million ways that art gives me strength. Certainly as like a young trans person, I didn't know that other people like me had ever existed. I didn't know that there could be space in the world for us. And seeing the photographs by Claude Cahoon and Marcel Moore really allowed me to imagine that there could be space for us. And that's the same thing that organizers do. And I constantly in my work experience the ways both concretely art can raise money, galvanize people to action, get people out of prison, help people reclaim land, change the story, like in the Trans Day of Resilience Project. And it just spiritually can help us survive.
Yeah, thank you for that. Sometimes I think it's important to remember that we can just make art for the sake of art and being alive, and that it doesn't have to be this massive resistance piece. But even sometimes the act of being alive and making art is in and of itself resistance, just because we live as queer, trans, Jewish, anti-Zionist people. But you mentioned a few things that actually I had written a question about earlier for you. So I wanted to ask about them. I feel like a big part of your work, and actually where I first found your work, revolves around abolition and community care. For example, the piece that you mentioned Miriam Kappa, but you have a piece with one of her wonderful quotes, one of her many wonderful quotes. And I'm curious to hear, if any, what connections you feel exist between abolition or your abolitionist identity, if that's how you identify, and Judaism or Jewish values.
I think that learning about the concept of Shiva was very meaningful to me, and learning, imagining how could we exist in the world differently? How could we treat each other differently? I think we have a long way to go in our movements. Even I think there's a lot of lip service for things, but in terms of how we actually treat each other, there's a lot of change that needs to happen. And yeah, I did a whole project and a zine with my dear friend, Louis Raven Wallace and Miriam Kaba, Ari, and many other people years ago about the concept of the scapegoat and the concept of cities of refuge from the Talmud. And how can we imagine refuge both politically through transformative justice, through sanctuary cities, and also spiritually in ourselves? What does it mean to be facing oppression or to face conditions in which you'll never have an opportunity for redemption with anyone but yourself? How can we create a city of refuge in ourselves? Yeah. And also, I love the idea that in Judaism, where we are, I think, invited to pursue tshuva passionately and with joy. So even when we have committed horrible misdeeds against each other and ourselves and the world, that Judaism is saying, don't be stuck in your guilt. Keep it moving. Find the joy in this redemptive process.
I'm glad that we ended up talking about that because I feel like those are the values that, for me, feel very aligned with abolition work. And when I say abolition work, like transformative justice work, restorative justice work, like work that revolves around dreaming the world to come and community care. And I was thinking about this a lot because we're entering the month of Elul, and I did a lot of Elul research and just thinking about the concept of I am my beloved's and my beloved's is mine as a way to conceptualize caring for our community, not like a romantic quote or suggestion, but expanding that to be like, we care for the people we are in community with, the people that we are surrounded by. And in turn, those people care for us. And that is how we move forward in the world. And if we want to show up fully for each other, we need to be prepared to repair harm that we have caused and grapple with harm that people in our community have caused. And that is so Jewish and also so abolitionist. And that crossover just feels very special to me. So I'm really glad that you highlighted some of that.
Okay, I should preface all of this with saying I'm reading the book This Is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared by Rabbi Alan Liu right now. And so I'm in this like connections are everywhere. The universe is speaking to me like moment. So I'm acknowledging that. But I do feel like everything timing wise right now just feels so special about reading your zines. It feels like it should be a regular high holiday reading, just like a lot of people read This Is Real and You're Completely Unprepared, because in this zine that you made with Lewis Raven Wallace, all of these questions about refuge and safety and systems of forgiveness, it's so Elul and it's so deeply introspective for Yom Kippur. One really powerful connection you made was about the literal sanctuary cities that are listed in the Torah, and one of them is Hebron, which its Arabic name being Khalil. And you have photos from visiting the West Bank, and in 2006, what a powerful time to be there. But the deep irony of Zionism's disconnection from Judaism by taking a literal sanctuary city of ancient times and making it a horrible, occupied, apartheid state where genocide is committed. And I was just, wow, this is so far from where my original question was, but we are facing a refugee crisis here in New York right now. We have migrant children sleeping on the streets. We are not a sanctuary city. And I just wondering what your thoughts are reflecting on what it means where you were talking about that sanctuary city within ourselves, or literally what's going on in Israel, Palestine right now, or just more generally about spiritual introspection and transformative justice.
My goodness, this is so broad. I'm like, I don't even know where the entry point is. Also, I do want to raise a question now about referring to it as Israel Palestine, because it's Palestine. It's all Palestine.
100%.
So why do we do that? Because so many people do that. I think we're trained to do that in so many settings. And how does that reaffirm a certain logic?
You're right.
Yeah.
So this is from Tim Toon that were back in 1999. And this one's one that really stood out to me as being super relevant wherever we are in our lives, wherever we are in our history. I just feel like this really spoke to me in this moment. So I'll read it and ask a specific question after I read this quote. I realize how incredible it is that I exist and that I am Jewish. How amazing it is that even this small part of my family has managed to survive. That although I will never know the particulars of all the lives lost and all my relatives and family history, that I know this. I can say the words, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, and know that these exact words have come out of the mouths of my ancestors for generations and generations. I can feel their breath in my mouth. These words bend time. It is said in Judaism that healing goes not only forward, but also back. So can you speak a little about Jewish generational trauma and how healing can go forward as well as back?
I can try. I mean, that's still 25 years later. That is still just a very guiding principle in my work, and something that I continue to learn about mostly from friends and comrades in communities of color and indigenous communities. And each generation gets as far as we can, each person in our lives. And I feel as a now aging trans person, I am so grateful for all the things that people are imagining and options and space that people are creating that benefit me, that are in a way going backward to my generation that we could never have imagined because we were in different conditions. I'm also very committed to how can we have agency in our own story? How are we artists of our own lives? That we can choose what different things mean. This is so fundamental, but it took me so long to learn in my life that just because something feels like absolutely soul destroying and ruining to your vision of your life in the moment, that I can have agency and I can choose, okay, this is what life is. Life is change. Life is loss. And life can be pleasure, and we can apply our creativity to figuring out how to have a good life. And by good, I don't just mean hedonistic and pleasurable, although that is definitely part of our Jewish commandment as well, but to just keep doing the good work. Like during the lockdown, I started having all kinds of new health and disability stuff, like many people. And I started having all kinds of pain and nerve pain in my arms and chronic pain all over my body. And I had to stop doing illustration work. And that was absolutely heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. I had incredible projects lined up that I was so excited to work on. I had quit my nonprofit job and I was going to do children's books. And yeah, it was so exciting to me and so exciting to think about doing work that was more imaginative for a different kind of audience. So it was just really committing myself to grieving and feeling that loss of what I thought my life would be, what I thought my life's purpose was. Like truly my life, what was giving meaning to my life for so many years was making movement art, was being a movement art machine. And to not have that anymore, I had to reimagine like, what is the meaning of my life? And thank God I have so many brilliant disabled people in my life who have taught me how to be disabled and who have taught me that we can make meaning out of our lives in so many different ways. And it's not about productivity. We have worth and value and meaning just by existing. So now I'm doing totally different kinds of work. And I still feel like sad that my life is not what I thought it would be. But because in previous times in my life, I had worked that muscle of learning how to grieve, learning how to change the story, learning how to be disabled, because that's so much of what being disabled is, learning how to be like a grief athlete, getting really good at change. And that's one of the million reasons disabled people have so much to teach everyone. So because I had learned so much about that, I feel like I actually was able to move through that process much more quickly than I would have otherwise.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in my academic world learning about disability justice and disability studies. And I feel like disability justice in a lot of ways really encompasses all of the things that we're talking about in these spaces. It encompasses transformative justice, it encompasses restorative justice, it encompasses all these concepts that we've been talking about grief and change and accountability. And that's just something really powerful that I don't think enough people and enough movements are tapping into. I think it ends up being mostly understood by people who are disabled and doesn't get to reach all of the people that it could reach in a way that I'm hoping we someday move towards. This is a bit of a pivot as a queer person, as a non-binary person, reading a lot of your older zines, a lot of things really resonated with me, which is obviously difficult because years have passed, decades have passed, and I would hope that maybe more things have changed than stayed the same. And I do think a lot of things have changed, like a lot of things. But there is still so much work that we have to do, especially within Judaism and within quote unquote traditional Jewish spaces. There's still such a heavy patriarchal and cis het influence or messaging. But we've talked about a lot of these movements on the podcast before, like the Queer Mikvah Project and Savara's Trans Halacha Project. What kinds of Jewish ritual would you hope to see practiced in Jewish communities that affirm and uplift trans and gender nonconforming and non-binary Jews?
That's such a good question. I don't know if I'm the right person to answer it, in part because I've been really alienated from Judaism because of Zionism. And even some of the projects he mentioned, they're not explicitly anti-Zionist. So I struggle with them. But again, I'm just so excited for what people are going to imagine that I can't imagine. I think me and Elliot Kukla and Ruben Zalman and Ari Lefort and some other people like a million years ago were starting this little group Trans Torah and starting to imagine what are some life cycle things for trans people. I mean, that I know I really needed as a young trans person. So there's that. But also, even beyond that, I'm excited for what you're talking about with disability justice. What would it look like to transform it from the roots? Not just like we're adding a ritual, but if you blow open the whole idea of the binary gender system, what does Judaism look like? It's a whole other galaxy.
I love what you're sharing. It reminds me of some of the work that Rabbi Julia Watts-Belzer is doing. And I don't know anything about Rabbi Julia Watts-Belzer's politics, but about transforming not just, we're going to have a wheelchair ramp to the Bima, but we're going to change the way we read the Torah to be like disability justice has always been there and people who are disabled have always been there. And that idea, I think, is exactly what you're saying. Let's flip the whole thing on its head. Let's not just like include people. Let's radically shift the entire system, which is absolutely where we want to go too.
Yeah. In response to your wonderful answer to my question about Jewish ritual, I do think that it is so connected to dreaming the world to come. And I think that it is a reminder for people like me and Jessie who are so passionate about creating Jewish ritual spaces that are anti-Zionist, not just organizing around anti-Zionism, but bringing Judaism and practicing Judaism with an anti-Zionist lens, being very explicitly anti-Zionist, because I do think a failing of a lot of organizing groups and most Jewish ritual spaces is not being explicitly anti-Zionist. Maybe they'll say they're non-statist or they don't support the occupation or something like that, but they won't actually use the language like anti-Zionism, or they'll have a reason that that language isn't what they're looking for. And I think it would just be so much more powerful if we could just say, no, we are anti-Zionist because what's happening is a genocide. And so there is nothing that you can be except anti-Zionist. And so I also feel excited about a lot of grassroots organizations or groups of people in much recent years that I think feel more comfortable being like, I am explicitly anti-Zionist and I'm looking to create a Judaism that embraces that. And yeah, that just makes me excited for the future. And I'm reflecting on that.
We're at our last question, but the last question is so intense and I apologize. If you could leave all of our listeners with one message, what would it be?
I'm thinking about what you were just saying, Ilana. Things are changing slowly. And that is my experience as well, that so many people are still afraid to just say that their project, the space, even themselves are anti-Zionist. There's just this self-censorship. And that is the floor. Like, that is truly the floor to me. Can we even just aspire and commit to anti-racism? Because that's what anti-Zionism is. There's no point. It's completely hypocritical to me to say that you give a shit about trans liberation or indigenous sovereignty or gender liberation in any way without being anti-Zionist. So I'm so excited for the work you're doing. I would love to continue to connect with you and build with you. And I want to just, like the mycelium, just like through the podcast networks, through the internet, through the spirit that connects all of us, just give each other strength to just interrupt that shit. Just push the organizations you are in to be anti-Zionist, to claim anti-Zionism, to realize how much safety and power and privilege most of us have in the US and use that power for good.
That was a perfect message to leave everyone with. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for being willing to talk to us today. I'm not going to lie, we reached out and I was like, this feels like a super long shot, but I love the work that they make and I'll give it a go. And so it just means the world that you were interested and willing to talk to us and that you took the time to have such a beautiful conversation with us. So thank you for taking time out of your day and taking energy to be with us and talk with us more than anything. Before I talk about our upcoming episode, I want to see if there's any work you want to highlight, either work that you're doing or work that other groups are doing that you think people should plug into.
I am building a lot of exciting things with amazing other artist organizers, but they're not quite ready for a public launch. Publicly, I'm working on the Creative Wildfire project with Climate Justice Alliance, Economy Coalition, and Movement Generation, which is a beautiful project. And folks can follow links on my socials and other places. I always like to support the campaign to free Ashley Diamond. When we talk about abolition, theoretically, I feel like we have a responsibility to also get down to the nuts and bolts. And as many people know, just because you actually are not in prison anymore, it doesn't mean that you are free and have the resources and support to survive. So my friend Ashley Diamond is a Black trans woman who is funny, loving, amazing singer, does an incredible Whitney Houston impression. She was caged in Georgia prisons for 10 years. She's a torture survivor. She was placed in solitary confinement for pretending to be a woman. She saw some of the art from the Trans Day of Resilience project when she was in solitary. And when I connected with her years ago, everyone kept saying, "You need to talk to Ashley. You need to talk to Ashley." And we got on the phone and she said to me, "I know you already. When I was in solitary, I saw your art. And it was so beautiful and it gave me strength. And I decided I was going to survive and get out of here. And one day you'd paint my portrait too. So please donate and I will drop the link and maybe you can share it on your platforms."
Definitely. I'm familiar with the Ashley Diamond campaign, and I just appreciate you highlighting that work as someone who's very involved in abolition spaces. I work with Survived and Punished New York, and I have comrades who are incarcerated in New York who I go to see frequently and talk to frequently. And I'm really appreciative that is what you chose to highlight. And we will definitely be including the link in the description to the podcast and sharing it on our Instagram. So thank you for highlighting that. And everyone, please check those things out and donate. Thanks everyone for listening. You can stay tuned because next week we're going to be talking to Veronica Stewart Frommer. Veronica is an artist, a writer, and an anti-nuclear weapons activist who also performs with the band Melt. And they will be joining us on our next episode. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much. It was truly a Micah pleasure. I look forward to more.
Yeah, definitely. We would love to stay connected and we appreciate it so much.